The Galactic Empire's capital system was cloaked in the calm of routine. Battle-tested fleets drifted lazily in formation, their commanders confident in the invincibility of their ships. Inside the Imperial Command Center, Sovereign Jackson lounged on his ornate throne, eyes scanning the tactical display with barely concealed boredom. Then it happened. The space near the system's outer rim rippled, distorting the stars before an enormous ship burst into view. Unlike any vessel the Empire had ever seen, its presence consumed the void. The human supercarrier. Sovereign Jackson blinked, momentarily speechless, as the bridge descended into murmurs. It was larger than their dreadnoughts, dwarfing even the Empire's finest. Magnificent, Jackson whispered, though his tone carried more amusement than awe. Admiral Reese stood on the bridge of the supercarrier, a man of few words, his grizzled features illuminated by the glow of the surrounding consoles. This was no reconnaissance mission. The supercarrier was humanity's bold declaration, a warning shot in a galactic chess game where they were no longer pawns. Admiral, a junior officer spoke, breaking the silence. We're in range of the Imperial capital. Reese nodded. His voice was steady, betraying none of the tension that gripped his crew. Open a channel. Moments later, the holographic image of Sovereign Jackson materialized, his regal robes and relaxed posture a stark contrast to the unyielding figure of Reese. Jackson smiled, eyes twinkling with condescension. Admiral Reese, Jackson greeted, his voice honeyed. To what do we owe this impressive display? Reese didn't flinch. Sovereign Jackson, the time for your empire's tyranny has come to an end. Humanity offers you a choice: stand down and dismantle your regime peacefully, or we will make sure you are forced to. The room around Jackson erupted in laughter. Commanders and officials exchanged amused glances, their voices buzzing with disbelief. The very notion that humans, a species still considered a galactic newcomer, could pose a threat was laughable. Jackson waved a hand, silencing the mirth. Admiral, you humans have always been fascinating, so audacious yet so fragile, Jackson said, his tone dripping with derision. But surely, you must realize your folly? We've crushed fleets 10 times your size. Reese's gaze never wavered. This isn't a battle of numbers, Sovereign. You'll learn that soon enough. Jackson chuckled, dismissing the threat with a wave. Very well, Admiral. If you wish to test your limits, we shall oblige. Prepare to meet the full might of the Empire. The transmission cut. The weight of the moment settled over the supercarrier's bridge, tension crackling in the air. Your orders, Admiral? The officer asked, a slight tremor in his voice. Reese took a slow breath, his eyes fixed on the vast expanse ahead. Power up the main cannons. Target the Imperial fleet. As the crew scrambled to obey, Reese allowed himself a moment of reflection. This wasn't a fight he had ever wanted, but humanity had been pushed too far. Now, they had to prove that even an empire spanning thousands of systems wasn't untouchable. The hum of energy filled the supercarrier as its weapons came online, a low rumble like the growl of a beast awakening from slumber. On the tactical screen, the Empire's ships moved into formation, their confidence unshaken. They still didn't understand. Reese leaned forward, his voice a calm storm. Engage. The Imperial fleet moved with mechanical precision, its vast array of warships locking into battle formation. Hundreds of sleek, silver destroyers flanked larger capital ships, their shields shimmering in the void as they prepared for what they believed would be an easy victory. From the supercarrier's bridge, Admiral Reese stood motionless, watching as the enemy closed in. Status report, Reese ordered, his voice steady despite the impending chaos. Commander Saranovic, his second-in-command, turned from her console. All systems are green. Shields at full capacity. Main cannons charged and ready for firing on your command. The atmosphere on the bridge was tense but controlled. Every officer knew the gravity of the situation. They were facing the heart of a galactic empire. Yet, no one wavered. Humanity had been underestimated before, but this time, they had brought their greatest weapon to the front lines. Reese's eyes swept over the crew, and then out into the blackness of space. The Imperial fleet, though intimidating, moved with a predictability he had expected. They were too confident, too sure of their superiority. He turned his attention to the tactical screen, where enemy ships filled the display like an unstoppable tide. They think they have the upper hand, Reese muttered, almost to himself. Let's show them how wrong they are. He raised his voice. Target the lead ship. Fire when ready. The supercarrier's main cannons, enormous turrets embedded along the hull, rumbled to life. A deep, resonating hum filled the ship as energy coursed through the conduits, culminating in a blinding blast of blue-white light. The bolt of energy shot through space, cutting through the darkness like a spear of divine wrath. On the viewscreen, the Imperial lead ship, a massive dreadnought, shuddered under the impact. Its shields flared briefly before collapsing entirely. The next moment, the ship erupted into a fireball, sending debris and wreckage spiraling into space. For the first time, the Imperial fleet hesitated. The destruction of one of their largest ships in a single shot was not something they had anticipated. Reese allowed himself a grim smile. He could almost feel the confusion and disbelief rippling through their ranks. Direct hit, Novik confirmed, her voice tight with controlled excitement. The dreadnought is gone. Good, Reese replied. Now let's make them panic. Target their flanks, scatter their formation. As the supercarrier's turrets rotated and prepared for the next volley, the Imperial fleet responded. Smaller ships broke off from the main formation, their commanders scrambling to reorganize in the wake of the devastating loss. Streams of energy beams and missile fire erupted from their ships, hurtling toward the human vessel. Incoming! Shouted an officer from the defense console. Brace for impact, Reese ordered, gripping the arm of his command chair. The ship shuddered as the first barrage struck its shields. Explosions blossomed across the energy barriers, causing them to flicker and wane under the relentless assault. The bridge lights dimmed for a moment, before systems stabilized. Shields holding at 70%, Novik reported, glancing up from her screen. Reese's jaw tightened. The Imperial fleet, though rattled, was still formidable. They weren't going to back down easily. Let's keep up the pressure, Reese said. We need to dismantle their chain of command. Focus fire on the battleships. They're the key to breaking their morale. As the supercarrier's cannons unleashed another salvo, the battle intensified. Imperial ships swarmed in, surrounding the human vessel from all sides, determined to crush this audacious challenge. The space around them became a storm of light and fire, the void filled with the soundless fury of war. Through it all, Reese remained calm, his eyes never leaving the tactical display. He knew this was just the beginning. The Imperial fleet's strength lay not just in numbers, but in their arrogance. They believed in their unassailable dominance, and it would be their undoing. They'll try to overwhelm us, Novik said, her voice low, watching the enemy's ships converge. Let them, Reese replied. They still haven't realized what they're up against. Another explosion rocked the ship, sending a jolt through the bridge. Sparks flew from an overheated console, and alarms blared. But the crew held their positions, focused and unshaken. Reese's eyes narrowed as he observed the enemy's movements. Prepare for Phase 2, he said quietly, his tone ominous. Novik turned to him, her brow furrowed. Phase 2, sir? Already? Reese nodded, a cold determination in his voice. We need to finish this quickly. They're not expecting what comes next. The tension in the air thickened as the crew prepared for the next phase of their plan. The Imperial fleet was closing in, but they still hadn't grasped the full scale of the weapon they faced. Reese allowed himself a final glance at the enemy formations. This was the moment everything would change. Activate the fleet division protocols, he commanded, a fierce glint in his eye. It's time to show them why humanity is feared. The next phase of the battle was about to begin, and the galaxy would never be the same. The supercarrier rumbled as it executed the fleet division protocols, its massive form splitting into 3 smaller yet equally imposing vessels. Each ship hummed with latent power, their sleek black surfaces absorbing the starlight, making them blend into the void. This was the heart of humanity's war strategy, adaptive, unpredictable, and utterly devastating. Admiral Reese stood at the center of the bridge, his jaw clenched in anticipation. "Division complete. All systems nominal," Commander Novik reported, her fingers dancing over the console. Her eyes flicked up to meet Reese's. "The Imperial fleet's in disarray. They've never seen anything like this." Reese nodded. "Good. Let's keep them on their heels. Begin Phase 2. Novik relayed the command, and the split fleet surged forward, each ship moving with terrifying speed and precision. The once cohesive Imperial formation now appeared fractured, ships scrambling to adjust to the sudden multiplication of human forces. Frantic communication signals sparked across enemy channels, but it was clear they were losing control. On the viewscreen, the battlefield unfolded like a chaotic dance of light and destruction. Human ships weaved between their enemies with surgical precision, cannons blazing as explosions erupted across the void. For every Imperial ship that fired, 2 more were blown apart by well-placed strikes. Captain Aaron Malco, commanding one of the smaller human vessels, barked orders to his crew as they flew dangerously close to an Imperial destroyer. "Hold steady! We need to breach their shields before we can deliver the payload." The destroyer's cannons roared, sending blinding beams of energy toward Malco's ship. The crew braced for impact, but their shields held firm. The ship shook violently as the blast hit, but Malco barely flinched. His focus remained on the mission ahead. "Now!" he shouted. The ship's torpedo bays opened, launching 2 glowing projectiles directly toward the Imperial destroyer. A moment later, the destroyer's shields collapsed, and the torpedoes struck true. The explosion lit up the darkness, casting an eerie glow on the battlefield as debris scattered. Malco grinned. "One more down. Let's keep moving." Back on Reese's bridge, the mood was electric, but the tension remained. Victory was far from certain, and Reese knew the Imperials had resources yet to be deployed. His instincts were sharp, honed by years of warfare, and something in the air made him wary. Suddenly, alarms blared. "Admiral," Novik's voice cut through the noise, "we've detected a massive energy surge. It's coming from the rear of their fleet." Reese's eyes narrowed as he studied the tactical display. A colossal ship, far larger than anything they'd encountered so far, was emerging from the Imperial fleet. It was a behemoth, bristling with weaponry, and its energy signature was off the charts. "A dreadnought," Reese muttered. "I was wondering when they'd bring out the big guns." The dreadnought loomed over the battlefield, its sheer size dwarfing everything around it. As it powered up its main weapon, the air on the bridge seemed to thicken with tension. Novik's voice was grim. "That thing could wipe out our entire fleet with a single shot if it's packing what I think it is." Reese's mind raced. The Imperial fleet was faltering, but the introduction of a ship of this magnitude could turn the tide in an instant. He had to act, and fast. "Get me Captain Malco on the comms," Reese barked. Moments later, Malco's face appeared on the screen, sweat beading on his forehead but his expression unwavering. "Captain, we've got a dreadnought in play, and it's powering up for a full assault. I need you to get close and disable its main weapon before it fires. It's our only shot." Malco nodded without hesitation. "Understood, sir. We'll get it done." The comm cut out, and Reese exhaled slowly. He trusted Malco, but the dreadnought was a beast unlike any they had faced. This mission would be as close to suicide as it got. "Commander," Reese said, turning to Novik, "prepare our remaining ships to cover Malco's approach. We can't let the Imperials pin him down before he reaches the target." Novik acknowledged the order, her fingers flying over the console. The remaining ships of the divided fleet shifted, converging on the dreadnought's location in a defensive formation, drawing enemy fire away from Malco's vessel. On board Malco's ship, the tension was palpable as they raced toward the massive dreadnought. Its size filled the viewscreen, a terrifying shadow blotting out the stars. His crew worked in silence, their movements swift and precise, knowing full well the stakes. As they neared the dreadnought, alarms blared again, enemy fighters closing in fast. "Evasive maneuvers," Malco ordered, gripping the armrests of his chair as the ship banked hard to avoid incoming fire. Energy blasts streaked past them, too close for comfort, but they pressed on, inching closer to the dreadnought's vulnerable underbelly. The weapon was almost fully charged, the glow from its cannon casting an ominous light across the battlefield. "This is it," Malcolm muttered under his breath. "Firing torpedoes!" one of his officers shouted. Two glowing projectiles shot out, cutting through the void. Time seemed to slow as they neared the dreadnought, heading straight for the weapon's core. There was a tense pause before the torpedoes struck. A deafening explosion followed, the dreadnought's main cannon rupturing in a violent cascade of fire and debris. The ship's power flickered, its shields faltering. Malco's crew erupted in cheers, but he remained focused. "We're not done yet. Let's take this monster down." Back on Reese's bridge, a grim smile crept across his face. "The tide is turning. Now we finish this." The aftershock of the explosion rippled through space, the massive dreadnought listing in the void as its primary weapon smoldered in ruin. Captain Malco's ship veered away from the wreckage, narrowly avoiding the cascade of debris as cheers erupted from his crew. But Malco remained stone-faced, his eyes fixed on the colossal Imperial vessel still afloat, though now bleeding energy and fire. "This isn't over yet," he muttered, leaning forward in his command chair. "Bring us around. We need to hit it again before it can stabilize." The exhilaration that had gripped the crew quickly faded as they focused on their next target. Around them, the battle raged on, human and Imperial ships locked in deadly combat. The smaller Imperial frigates, shaken by the loss of their capital ship's cannon, scrambled to regroup, but their efforts lacked cohesion. Yet Malco knew that even with the dreadnought wounded, the battle was far from won. On the bridge of the HMS Resolute, Admiral Rees paced, his mind working through the strategy. The dreadnought's power loss was a boon, but he couldn't afford complacency. The Imperials still outnumbered them, and it wouldn't take long for their reinforcements to arrive. "Commander Novik," Rees said sharply, turning to the tactical officer, "I want our remaining ships to converge on the dreadnought. We need to make sure it doesn't have a chance to regroup." "Aye, sir," Novik replied, fingers flying across her console. The tactical display shifted, showing human ships maneuvering into position, circling the crippled dreadnought like wolves closing in on a wounded beast. Rees's eyes flicked to the distant Imperial fleet. Their lines were breaking, their formations frayed as their leadership faltered. It was a sight that should have brought relief, but instead, it filled him with a gnawing sense of urgency. He had fought Imperials long enough to know they didn't surrender easily. Suddenly, the communications officer called out. "Incoming transmission, Admiral." "It's from the dreadnought." Rees frowned. "Put it through." The view screen flickered, and the face of Imperial Admiral Carvax appeared. His features were sharp, his dark eyes gleaming with fury despite the fires raging in the background of his bridge. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, but he stood tall, his pride unshaken. "Admiral Rees," Carvax growled, his voice cold as steel. "I hope you don't think this battle is over. You've wounded my ship, but you'll never break the Empire." Rees met Carvax's gaze, his expression unreadable. "You're outnumbered, your dreadnought's weapon is destroyed, and your fleet is falling apart. This battle's already lost. Surrender now, and I'll consider sparing what's left of your forces." Carvax's lip curled in disdain. "Spare us? The Empire does not beg for mercy, human. We are eternal. Your momentary victory will mean nothing when our full might descends upon your pathetic worlds." Rees's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to remain calm. "It's over, Carvax. There's no need for more bloodshed." Carvax leaned closer to the screen, his eyes narrowing. "You don't understand, do you? I'm not interested in your mercy. My only goal now is to take you and your fleet down with me." The transmission cut out before Rees could respond, and the lights on the dreadnought's hull began to flicker ominously. Novik's hands flew across the tactical display, her face pale. "Admiral, they're overloading their core," she said, her voice tight with alarm. "The entire ship's going to detonate. If we're within range when it goes off, I know, Reese snapped. All ships, evasive maneuvers. Get clear of the blast radius. The order went out in an instant, and the fleet scrambled to pull back from the doomed dreadnought. Malco's ship, still closest to the massive vessel, veered sharply, engines flaring as they desperately tried to escape the coming explosion. Faster! Malco shouted, gripping the armrest as the ship shook violently. We need to get out of here, now! On the Resolute, Reese watched the tactical display, his heart pounding. The dreadnought was a ticking time bomb, and they didn't have much time. The Imperial ships, realizing what was happening, were also fleeing, abandoning their positions and making a frantic retreat. But they weren't going to make it. 10 seconds until detonation, Novik announced, her voice steady despite the rising tension. Reese clenched his fists, eyes locked on the dreadnought as the countdown began. 5. The dreadnought's hull began to crack, glowing with a fiery intensity as its core reached critical mass. 4. Malco's ship strained under the pressure, engines at full burn. 3. The human fleet pulled further back, some ships just barely clearing the danger zone. 2. The dreadnought's hull buckled inward, collapsing under the sheer force of the energy building within. 1. The dreadnought erupted in a cataclysmic explosion, a massive fireball expanding outward, swallowing everything in its path. The shockwaves slammed into the fleeing ships, rattling their hulls and sending smaller vessels spiraling out of control. But the human fleet had pulled back just far enough to avoid total destruction. On the bridge of the Resolute, Reese watched in grim silence as the explosion faded, leaving only scattered debris where the dreadnought had once loomed. The battle was over. The Imperial fleet, now leaderless and disorganized, was retreating, vanishing into the depths of space. Status report, Reese ordered, his voice hoarse but steady. Novik scanned the display, then looked up, her expression one of cautious relief. Minimal damage to our ships, Admiral. We've lost a few fighters, but the fleet is intact. Reese exhaled, the tension in his shoulders finally easing. Good. Let's get our people home. As the crew began to relax, Reese glanced at the tactical display one last time, his gaze lingering on the scattered remains of the Imperial dreadnought. He had won this battle, but Carvax's words echoed in his mind, a chilling reminder of the war still to come. The Empire would return, and next time, they wouldn't underestimate humanity.